I'll smoke you in the 8K pots. You smoke me in the 150K pots. Deal?
Yeah. I don't like the political. I really don't. I mean, I did it.
So Dirk going to bring it in here on the button with 9-8. And he's flopped a gut shot. Now Lucky has top pair.
Who's coming?
And Lucky's going to bet right out. Interesting to see how Dirk plays this one. Getting led into as the pre-flop raiser. Just with the gut shot, he's just going to call.
What is that?
I bet that.
I think Lucky gave him a blind bet here, Nick.
Yeah.
A blind 4,000 on the turn. It's an ace, so that's kind of interesting here. Dwan's just going to call, and I assume Dwan is setting up a river bluff.
All right, it's like the old days of poker, a blind bet heading into the turn by Lucky. I'm loving it. Not exactly as a play, but, you know, as a spectator.
It's
fun.
interesting.
It's fun to see. What do you think about the way Lucky's playing the hand so far?
Okay. Certainly, obviously, 10-3 off pre-flop is an absurd call.
Bit of a mistake,
We don't have to spend much time on that. The donk on the flop is not terrible. This is the kind of board three ways that Dwan probably has a lot of checks on. And now maybe not with this hand, but he has a lot of checks. And, you know, you're denying equity with a hand that kind of doesn't hate denying equity. I don't hate it. I don't know if I would do it. I don't know if I love it, but I certainly don't hate the bet on the flop.
I agree with you. And Dwan could go either way with raise or call here. I don't hate calling when they're super deep. It's a pretty hidden hand if you make the nuts. It's if Lucky has a big hand, you might get a ton of chips out of it just by calling anyway.
I like the call a lot because also, you know, Lucky's going to have a lot of checks on the turn in theory.
Yeah.
Because you don't think he's going to blind bet the
I guess
turn.
he's not going to have any checks on the turn because it doesn't matter what the card is.
It turns out he's not. But when we're sitting in Dwan's seat before this has happened, we think also we're going to have opportunities to steal when he checks the turn a lot, right? And that's great. And there's going to be a lot of good cards for us to try and steal.
Like the card that we got, except, you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't turn out that way. We don't really have to go deep into Lucky's blind bet. I think he's just like having a little fun or something. Like, is there much to say about why he would blind bet?
I mean, the one thing we did come up with on the podcast that was sort of cool is that when an overcard comes anyway, this is the way to get value out of worse hands.
Yeah, if one has a 6 or a pocket pair below the 10s, he might just fold if Lucky bets again on the turn, which would be weird to do on an ace, but let's assume he does just for the sake of this argument. But when Dwan knows that Lucky hadn't seen the turn when he bet, he might be obligated to call with those hands.
I think so.
I don't know if that's enough to justify the play.
I don't think it is, but at least that's one positive.
All right.
So we got that going for us.
So Dwan is in this spot. Lucky has blind bet.
Yeah.
Should Dwan just be raising instead of calling here? Obviously, I think you can't fold when we're this deep and you still have a draw to the nuts.
There's no way we should be folding here.
Yeah.
It's relatively cheap. I mean, you know, there's 9K in it. There's 13K in the pot for Dwan, and it's 4K to him. And he's in position. And if he hits, he's got to believe he's going to make some money, right?
Right.
I like a raise a lot more than a call, off the top of my head anyway, because I worry about the implied odds really being there with this call. Like, sure, we're deep, but are we going to get a huge amount of money out of Lucky anyway? Even if we hit, we need to make a lot of money on the river. We only get there like 9% of the time, so we need to make like 40,000 on the river. Well, not 40 because there's money in the pot already, but still a whole chunk of money, 30,000 on the river for this to be justified. That's hard to do.
Well, I guess we have a lot of bluffs in us too. And maybe
Yes.
Dwan is thinking this ace is a card that I can represent later, and I can do a better job doing that by calling than by raising.
Right.
So that's probably a big piece of it.
I think so. So he's saying, I have a lot of ace queen here, bro.
Yeah.
And I can try and win on the river sometimes.
I guess that's what he's saying. I guess we'll see what happens. This is a weird one so far.
Yeah.
You hear Jonathan call Lucky bro? Well, you can be our bro on Nitrogen Sports. What a fun time.
Sure.
I mean, really, the brotherhood comes from playing in this, in sisterhood, whatever you want to be, in this amazing tournament. Automatic overlay. It's an incredible deal.
You can't save it now.
No.
You've offended half the planet. Too late.
If you're offended, don't come to Nitrogen Sports.
Don't say that.
If you're offended, do come to
There
Nitrogen
it
Sports.
is.
Play the automatic overlay tournament. Also, if you're not offended, use the link in our pinned tweet. That's where you can get access to that tournament. There's always an overlay. We'll see you there.
No purpose other than that.
Well, what a terrible
Yeah,
card. though.
horrible.
Yeah.
I think
6,000
Tom is
here.
going to have to give up.
I think
It's the worst card ever.
I think because Lucky blind bet and then the ace came, Dwan was going to call and bomb the river if checked to, but not on this card. Because I think Lucky would have checked any river except for this card.
Yeah.
So
This would be suicide.
super unlucky here for Durr, because I think he would have put the hammer down at the end.
Well, you could tell the reason he's not giving up is because that was his plan, and I don't think he wants to abort.
Well, especially when he's getting bet into.
Yeah.
1 minute.
I think he thought that he was going to get checked to at the end. And that's because of that blind bet on the turn before the ace came out.
He's gonna. He needs to hit the eject button on this hand.
I don't think you want to try to rep aces full here and get a guy off a trip tens that looks like this.
Yeah.
Which is the only thing that he could probably be thinking about here.
I'm
right?
just shocked Lucky hasn't started telling him to call. He called. What did he call with?
He called
with what?
With 9 high?
I don't understand it.
Well, here we are again. This is not the first time we have seen Tom Dwan call with 9 high incorrectly in a cash game on the river. He famously did it against Daniel Negreanu back in the day on high stakes poker.
Also for a big amount of money.
Yeah. So, okay. There are ways we can justify this. It actually can happen. Now, Lucky bet really small. That throws a bit of a wrench into things. So we have to make a lot of assumptions here. Because obviously this is a great card for Lucky. He should probably bet, right?
I think you should bet for sure. Like Tom's gonna maybe bet like his very best aces for value if Lucky checks, maybe small. But like as Lucky, we can determine how big the pot is and how big our bet is much more so by betting ourselves or letting Tom decide.
Well, it seems like
let's try and charge some of these hands a lot of money, I would think, but that's not what Lucky does.
Seems like he should have bet more.
Yeah,
but he doesn't. He bets 6K. So who cares? That's not the important thing here. We're talking about Tom Dwan who called with 9 high. All right. So this is the theory that we came up with on our podcast to justify Tom Dwan's call.
Okay.
It includes a lot of subjective assumptions.
A lot of contortions.
Okay. But let's assume for a second that the only hands that Lucky actually goes 3 streets with, like bets the river to, because I think there's a lot that he goes 2 streets with when he donks the flop and then blind bets the turn.
Sure.
But the only hands he actually goes 3 streets with are his bluffs that make sense, which are gut shots, and his tens. All right. So obviously, Dwan is thinking, okay, a raise is not going to net me anything against those hands because I beat all of the gut shots or chop with them, and the tens aren't going to fold. At least Dwan maybe thinks the tens aren't going to fold. They probably aren't. I'm not really sure. But let's assume they're not.
Okay.
So then we have to do the combos. We did the math on our podcast, so we don't have to do it here. But it turns out there are 76 combos of gut shots that Dwan is beating and 9 that he's chopping with. Mm-hmm. And there are 90 combos of tens, which include full houses.
That's when you give Lucky every 10 in the deck. Then you have to know that he's capable of calling with like 10-3 off. But he is.
It's
so
also
maybe
giving
Dwan would
him
know
every gut shot in the deck, which is why we're not removing any combos because there's a lot of subjective assumptions. So we're just giving you the total combos.
Right.
So clearly there are more value hands than bluffs. But Tom Dwan has to call 6K to win 23K.
Yes.
So that's okay. If that's Lucky's actual range, you could call a much bigger bet than this. If you remove 2/3 of the gut shots and keep all of the tens, you can still call this bet as Tom Dwan.
I mean, the thing that's so weird about it is I would prefer to call a bigger bet as Tom Dwan mostly, right? Now, Tom Dwan may know things about Lucky's sizing frequencies, and so maybe this makes this great to call the 6K here. But I would be very concerned in a vacuum when someone bets only 6K into a 17K pot on the river, by the way, after betting 4K into 9 on the turn blind, that I'm beat by a lot of other things too, not just trips and better, that he can have other hands here that are also a problem for me, that I might be losing to. So I'd be concerned about that as Dwan. He clearly isn't. And in fact, called the turn, I got to believe, not just to try and bluff later or to hit his 7,
because
but
he thought
also
he was ahead sometimes.
He's ahead enough of the time. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced about Lucky having value hands that aren't a 10. You know, like that you have to give him a 6 or an ace.
It's mostly an ace.
Yeah,
I
but
think.
he dunked the flop.
I know. He's a weirdo.
And then he blind. Yeah, I know, but a 10 makes more sense than those hands.
He could have like ace 6, right? Ace 6 where he bets the flop with a 6. He donks, so he doesn't get, and then he donks, and then he makes aces up, and then he has aces up now, but he bets small to like block bet with an ace.
Ace 6 is the only one that makes sense to me.
And even that is sort of weak.
Even if we add that in, if we still give him all the gut shots, it makes mathematical sense. And honestly, I don't know where else to go with it.
It's hard.
I think that must be what Dwan was thinking, right?
I guess so, yeah, man.
Because otherwise, you would either raise if you put him on a decent amount of marginal hands, or you would just fold because you'd be like, well, there's no chance I'm ahead with 9 high. So Dwan must believe those gut shots are all out there.
I wonder if Dwan would have folded to just a bigger bet and he just was like a prisoner of the math here a little bit.
Even a bigger bet, if he does the same combos, you can call a pot size bet.
It's amazing.
You can call more than a pot size bet with 9 high if those combos are correct.
Yeah. Probably what's going on, though, is like we're saying, Dwan probably has a sense of how Lucky sizes. Lucky sizes 6K. Dwan's like, oh, that's polarizing sizing for Lucky on the river.
Okay.
So now I can throw out all the middling stuff, which seems counterintuitive, but it's Tom Dwan. We're going to trust that he knows what he's doing
Yeah.
here with this piece of it. And he's like, okay. And now the math just says it's
Gotta
an
call.
easy call, baby.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the solver's not going to see it that way, but let's take a look.
I cannot wait to find out.
Wesley Cannon was tasked with the monumental task.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you. Of solving this 9-high call by Tom Dwan. Let's see what we came up with, what the solver had to say.
Okay.
Back to the flop. It does want Lucky to lead with all of his 10x.
Isn't that interesting? I guess there's a lot of checks for Dwan, in theory, 3 ways on this kind of a board.
I mean, the solver doesn't know it's 3 ways, but no big deal.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Fair point.
It's the solver's immune to pre-flop flow and all that. It does know the Lucky is out of position, but the solver likes to lead top pair. That happens a lot.
Fair enough.
It also, for his bluffs, it wants Lucky to bluff with his gutters with backdoor flush draws and 0 showdown backdoor flush draws like 8-4 suited. This is a point in Dwan's favor for showdown value for the 9-8. It's beating all of those hands.
I mean, being able to show up with 8-4 suited, maybe all the way through, in theory anyway, does help Dwan's case a little bit, right?
It does. It does. And the solver does want Dwan to continue on the flop, but does prefer raising this hand because it contains a heart. Jonathan, explain what that means because I struggle with that one.
Yeah, so by having a heart, what we do is we unblock suited backdoor flush draws for Lucky, like Lucky having 2 diamonds in his hand, 2 clubs in his hand, 2 spades in his hand. If we didn't have that, then we're blocking those a little bit more. And those are the zero, not zero, but near zero equity bluffs some of those have in there. So those are the kinds of hands we could fold out. If we have more of those kinds of cards in our hand, it's harder to fold those out because they don't exist as much.
Well done.
Thank you.
Because that's a little complex there.
Yeah.
Let's go to the turn. The ace of hearts, which the solver doesn't have a blind bet button on it, unfortunately. So we
One
can't
day.
really solve the blind bet piece of it. So we're going to do it as if Lucky knew what was going on here, I guess, because what else can you do?
I don't know.
It does want Lucky to check with 10-3, but surprisingly wants him to bet a lot of his better 10s, 10-8 and better. I guess the kicker of 10-8 is just good enough to go for value when you're called on the flop and the ace comes. That feels just too
wrong.
wide to me, solver.
Yeah.
You're drunk, solver.
It feels
Go home.
strange. We get to charge draws. We get to charge smaller pocket pairs and a 6 and things like that. But I just don't know how much of those make up Dwan's range versus all the other stuff that's beating us, like all 10s, all aces, over pairs. I don't know, man. I'm not a fan of this. Like, all
Neither am
Dwan's
I.
10s are beating us.
Speaking of not a fan, the solver is not a fan of Dwan continuing.
Oh.
He wants him to fold 100% of his 9-8s.
Solver is like, I ain't going to that concert.
But then you have to click the button. Wesley had to click the button that says Dwan calls, though, and we have to go to the river with 9-8. So maybe the solver will like what he did on the river.
Okay, well, it's going to be forced to reevaluate. I'll say that.
Yeah, no, it hates it.
Yeah, of course
It hates
it does. Of course it
Dwan
does.
calling the river. The main reason being that he blocks Lucky's most likely bluffing combos. He beats all of those combos with 9-8 or chops with them, but he blocks them.
So you might be wondering, what kind of hands would the solver be bluff catching with? And the best answer the solver came up with is hands like King, Queen, and King, Jack with backdoor flush draws on the flop, where maybe they call the flop, they turn the gutter, they're in position, they decide to call again, and now they're unblocking all those straight draws, right?
Yep.
The 9-8, it's beating 9-7. There's more of them out there, and so it can call with King High some of the time.
I guess that's what's going on.
I mean, wow. A lot of Mary Lou Retton level gymnastics happening here, though.
It's a topical reference.
Thank you. Okay, so many contortions were made in the killing of this video. So what do you guys think about all this? So you heard what we think. You heard what the solver thinks. The solver is so against Dwan calling the turn. Do you guys think that that's right? I mean, I think you can make a case Dwan could raise the turn. I think you make a case that he can call the turn. I don't hate those decisions. A call on the river does feel a little aspirational. Do you agree? Let us know what you think in the comments.
Is he just a fish on a heater, as we've heard from some of our
It's
Discord?
only been 10 years.
Some of our Discord members have said that.
Yeah,
In fact,
one.
Discord member. But we do have a Discord server where we talk about these hands. We post new threads for each hand, and we also have a lot of fun poker talk. And you can post your hands for review, and a lot of people post their hands and get a lot of good feedback.
Yeah.
Including from us sometimes.
Indeed.
The lucky ones, at least. We'll see you there.